Hello everyone, welcome back for more human physiology. Let's have a very brief discussion on cranial nerves just to round out our overall discussion on the brain itself. So, cranial nerves are going to represent a way to get afferent information and efferent information into and out of the brain directly without having to go through the spinal cord first. I think I mentioned this in chapter 12, but this is mostly going to be reserved for pathways that exist already very close to the brain to begin with. So for afferent information, we're going to talk about the optic nerve for the eyes. The eyes are already very close to the brain. The vestibulocochlear nerve for the ears. The ears are already very close to the brain. The olfactory nerve for the nose, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these other nerves are going to be involved in things like taste and somatosensory modalities reserved for the face, like the facial nerve and the trigeminal nerve. So there are exceptions to this. So the vagus nerve, for example, will be involved in a lot of pathways that go to visceral organs located down in the abdomen, things like the heart and the lungs and the things like that. But for the most part, cranial nerves are reserved for pathways that are very close to the brain to begin with. So you're not going to have to memorize all 12 pairs of cranial nerves, although to kind of round out your education, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to eventually do that, but for this class, you don't actually have to do that. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. They come in pairs because we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere of the brain, right? So the way these things are numbered is that they are numbered with Roman numerals. And the way we assign numbers is that Roman numeral number 1, the olfactory nerve, that will be the cranial nerve that is located closest to the anterior part of the brain, meaning the front of the brain. And then as you go to 2, 3, 4, and so on up to 12, you get more and more and more posterior. So the olfactory and optic nerves are going to be closest to the front of the brain, and then the accessory and hypoglossal nerves will be located closest to the back, right? So the thing that I want us to focus on here, since we're not going to try to memorize these for the time being, once we get to the somatic and autonomic nervous systems, we will talk about specific cranial nerves when they become relevant, so we'll worry about those then. But the thing I want us to focus on now is basically what kind of information do these cranial nerves carry. So for each function that you see here, you'll notice an S, an M, or a B. So smell, S, vision, S, eye movements, M, eye movements, M. So what that is telling you is if you see an S, this cranial nerve will only carry afferent information, meaning it does not carry motor information. If you see an M, it's the opposite. It carries only efferent or motor information, but not afferent or sensory information. But if you see a B, it's kind of like a two-way street. It carries both afferent and efferent information going in opposite directions. So, for example, the olfactory and optic nerves are purely sensory. So the olfactory nerve carries afferent information about smell from the nasal cavity to the brain, but there's no need for efferent information to go back the other way. Same deal with the optic nerve. It carries afferent sensory information about the things you're seeing from the retina of the eyes into the brain, but there's no need for efferent information to go back the other way. So you should take note of exactly what that means, and you don't have to memorize these things, but do take note of the fact that many of these cranial nerves are specialized for carrying either sensory information or motor information, but not usually both, although there are examples of some cranial nerves that carry both, like the trigeminal nerve here, and then the facial nerve. The glossopharyngeal nerve carries both. The vagus nerve, which we mentioned, carries both, but a good number of these cranial nerves carry one or the other, but not both. They're kind of like one-way streets. And as I mentioned, the vagus nerve is going to be very, very important when we start talking about the autonomic nervous system in Chapter 15. The vagus nerve is going to be responsible for a lot of our parasympathetic regulation of a lot of our visceral organs, like the digestive system and the heart that you see here. Many of these connections come into the brainstem itself. If we back up here, you can see kind of how these cranial nerves protrude out. Some of them, the more anterior ones, kind of stick right into the brain right here, but a lot of these protrude out of the brainstem. So, for example, the vagus nerve involves pathways that lead directly into and out of the medulla, which you can see right here. Then in this column here, you can kind of see where those pathways come into and out of the brain. A lot of them are going to be around the area of the brainstem. All right, so that's going to do it for this hopefully very short video. Join us next time for one last video, and we will start talking about the spinal cord and spinal nerves. See you next time.